Chapter 258. Yu Qianqiu glanced at him in surprise. He had thought that with his wild and untamed character, he wouldn't give in so easily. He was prepared to torture him again and completely tame him. He didn't expect him to be someone who knew how to adapt to circumstances. He was a promising talent. He allowed him to kneel on the ground and ignored him. Yu Qianqiu summoned 10 hero members and rewarded them generously, encouraging them to continue to work hard and protect Shi Wenguang's safety. Of course, the material rewards were quite generous too. After getting the 10 people to return to their positions, Yu Qianqiu smiled at Shi Wenguang and said, "There's still a long way to go in the future. General, please take care of yourself. I, Yu Qianqiu, will bid farewell here." "Farewell, mister." The father and son couldn't get him to stay, so they could only cup their hands and send him off. When he raised his head again, Yu Qianqiu was already gone. The tower-like man on the ground had also disappeared. Shi Wenguang stopped and sighed. It's a pity that little Tian isn't as good as him. In Utopia, Zhang Peng looked around and was a little confused. Yu Qianqiu said coldly, "You might be considered a fierce general in the mortal world, but here, anyone is stronger than you. I'll give you a chance to break away from the conflicts of mortals. Grasp it well. When the time comes, you'll know how insignificant you are." Guan Yu rode his horse over, and Yu Qianqiu felt a headache when he saw the broken horse. He said calmly, "This is my second disciple. Bring him to train with Hong Qi. You must supervise him strictly." Guan Yu frowned. He didn't understand why Yu Qianqiu would take in disciples one after another. He nodded and shouted to Zhang Peng, "Follow me." "Good horse." Zhang Peng stared at Red Rabbit and couldn't help but exclaim. He was a soldier who had galloped on the battlefield, so he was naturally fond of good horses. When he turned back, Yu Qianqiu had already disappeared. He immediately ran after the horse. Inside Hibiscus's room in Wanfen Garden, a man and a woman were locked in the room. Just as they were about to lose control of themselves, a loud moan suddenly rang out. Yu Qianqiu was startled. He quickly covered her mouth and said guiltily, "Grandaunt, lower your voice." Hibiscus's amorous feelings were boundless. She shyly said, "I couldn't help it." Just as he finished speaking, he heard the door open with a bang. Ferdinand shouted, "How dare you!" His voice stopped abruptly. What entered his eyes was a naked man and woman flashing into the quilt. Yu Qianqiu poked his head out and smiled shyly, Elder Fei, long time no see." After seeing it clearly, Ferdinand's body swayed and he almost couldn't stand still. His expression was twitching non-stop. Needless to say, the other person was definitely his daughter. There were hurried footsteps coming from outside the courtyard. Ferdinand took a breath and walked out of the door. With his back facing the room, he shouted, "It's okay. Go back." There was a rustling sound of clothes being put on. After a while, Yu Qianqiu, who was hiding behind Hibiscus, walked to the door. Both of their expressions were quite interesting. The former smiled awkwardly, "Elder Fei. Hee." Ferdinand resisted the urge to kill this kid and said in a low voice, "Hibiscus stays. You come with me." "Damn it. I'm so embarrassed. I'm actually caught in bed. Why does this old guy walk without making a sound? I didn't even have time to run away." At this time, Yu Qianqiu's expression was very depressed. He squeezed out a smile to bid farewell to the extremely shy Hibiscus and followed his future father-in-law. Passing through the courtyard corridor, they turned into a dark room. Ferdinand faced a wall and didn't say anything for a long time. Yu Qianqiu stood behind and wanted to say something but didn't dare to say anything. So, the two of them were wasting time there. "How did you come?" Ferdinand, who had been silent for a long time, finally spoke. His attitude was not bad. Yu Qianqiu breathed a sigh of relief and said bluntly, I stole it. The former did not continue to linger on this topic. He sighed and said, Do you come often? Not often. I come every few days, Yu Qianqiu answered very honestly. Ferdinand, who had his back to him, twitched his face again. Anyone who saw his daughter lying on the same bed with another man in an improper manner would not feel comfortable, especially the kind of man who visited frequently. I want you to promise me one thing. Ferdinand resisted the urge and turned around to stare at him. As for the previous form of questioning, he would not say it even if he was beaten to death. Otherwise, he would really be angered to death. Yu Qianqiu smiled and said, Tell me, tell me. As long as I can do it, I will promise you. I want you to promise me that no matter what happens, you can't let Furong suffer any grievances in this life. Otherwise, I will never let you go. Ferdinand stared at him and added fiercely, I will not let you go even if I die. Don't worry about this. Yu Qianqiu grinned and said. Obviously, the other party did not object to him sleeping with his daughter. He immediately patted his chest and promised, even if you don't say it, I will not let Furong suffer any grievances. At least I can swear to God that I, Yu Qianqiu, will let Furong live a carefree life. Otherwise, she will never be at peace. Hearing him swear, Ferdinand nodded slightly. His tight face finally relaxed. He pointed to the chair on the side and let him sit down. Then, he sighed and said, Furong's mother died early. It's all my fault. Otherwise, Furong wouldn't have to suffer so much. I'm sorry for her and her mother. Sigh. I can see that Furong likes you very much, so I hope you can treat her well. Needless to say. However, you don't have to blame yourself. I believe you must have your difficulties. Yu Qianqiu comforted him hypocritically. He felt refreshed and comfortable now. Speaking of Furong's suffering, he suddenly frowned and said, Elder Ferdinand, let me ask you something. What happened to Furong's face? It can't be an accident, right? Hearing that, a trace of bitterness flashed across Ferdinand's face. He shook his head and said, It's all my fault. It's all my fault. He painfully told the ins and outs of the matter. It turned out that Furong's mother was also a female disciple of Wanfen Garden. Her appearance was incomparable in Wanfen Garden. This could be seen from Furong's appearance. However, when she had sex with Ferdinand, the latter was already Lan Bingshua's husband. To put it bluntly, Furong's birth was the result of Ferdinand's affair with a female disciple of the garden. In the cultivation world, it was normal for a man to have more than one woman. However, Lan Bingxue could not tolerate it, so a tragedy happened. Speaking of Lan Bingxue, there was a secret that outsiders didn't know. Lan Bingxue was not a human, but a monster. She was a jade toad that had cultivated for more than 1,000 years. She was born with an ice spell, and her cultivation had reached the early stage of crossing calamity. She was the pet of Ma Jiugu's father, who was the former sect master of Fuxian Island. At that time, she hadn't transformed into a human yet. After Ma Jiugu's father died, she followed Ma Jiugu. After transforming into a human, she lived in seclusion. Very few people on Fuxian Island knew her identity. They only knew that she served Ma Jiugu all year round. Because of Ma Jiugu's reputation, no one dared to ask about her. At that time, Ferdinand hadn't taken charge of Wanfen Garden yet. He was just one of the outstanding disciples in the garden. Coincidentally, he had the opportunity to visit Lan Bingxue often. The two of them fell in love and became cultivation companions. However, he didn't know that she was a monster at that time, and no one told him. Later, with Lan Bingshue's help, Ma Jiugu passed the position of the principal elder of Wanfen Garden to Ferdinand. On the night when Ferdinand took charge of Wanfen Garden, Lan Bingxue naively thought that her husband would accept the fact that she was a monster after helping him so much. So, she told him about her background and her background. Ferdinand was shocked, but he didn't show it at that time. However, he felt a knot in his heart and gradually had the tendency to alienate her. Then, he met the beautiful Furong's mother. After a long time, something that shouldn't have happened between them. They had been secretly communicating with each other. It was not until Furong was born that this matter was exposed. After knowing this, Lan Bingxue was angry, but she didn't say anything. When Ferdinand left Wanfen Garden, she completely exploded. Not only did she torture Furong's mother, but she also swallowed her mother. She even threw Furong, who was still in swaddling clothes, into a brazier, intending to burn her alive. Fortunately, Ma Jiugu appeared in time and saved Furong. If it were someone else, Lan Bingxue wouldn't have let them go even if they had rushed to the scene. Furong's face, which was saved, was also left with an indelible scar from being burned by the fire. After Ferdinand came back to know this, he wanted to fight with Lan Bingxue. However, Ma Jiugu came to mediate and became the middleman. She made an agreement between the two. Little Furong was then placed in the mulberry garden to grow up. Needless to say, she suffered a lot. Since then, Ferdinand and Lan Bingxue had always been harmonious on the surface but not on the inside. This was the course of the matter. After listening, Yu Qianqiu touched his chin and sneered, "I was wondering why I felt cold when I got close to her. It turns out that she's a jade toad that has been cultivating for 1,000 years. She even practiced some ice spell. In the end, it's all my fault." Ferdinand's face was full of self-blame as he shook his head in pain. "This matter can't be blamed on you. The biggest responsibility still belongs to that toad monster." Yu Qianqiu squinted his eyes and said in a deep voice, "It's said that the most vicious thing is a woman's heart. It's indeed true. Hee hee. I don't care what the reason is, and I don't care when it happened. Damn it. You dare to lay your hands on my woman. You have to pay me back with interest." Chapter 259. Hearing this, Ferdinand slowly turned around, frowned, and immediately warned, "Don't mess around. Lan Bingxue is always with Ma Jiugu. She's not someone you can afford to provoke. I've heard about what you've been doing recently. Although you have that overbearing fire spell, you're still in the core formation stage, after all. The horror of the final stage of passing calamity is not something you can imagine. Compared to the early stage of passing calamity like me, it's a world of difference. Even if you don't think for yourself, you have to think for Furong. Oh. He's a bit like a father-in-law now." Yu Qianqiu laughed, I understand. While saying this, he was thinking about when he would have a chance. Also, Ferdinand said solemnly, "I don't know how you entered Fuxian Island, but I advise you not to run around on the island. Once you're discovered, it'll be difficult for you to leave." Yu Qianqiu repeatedly said yes, then listened to a lot of nagging. He really didn't want to listen anymore, so he found an excuse to run to Furong. After saying goodbye to Furong, he returned to Utopia to find Bai Suzhen to talk about some things, then the two of them went to the spiritual herb garden together. The exotic flowers and plants in the garden were swaying. They were all grown from the things Yu Qianqiu collected. Now this spiritual herb garden was managed by a group of women under Bai Suzhen. Because of the purple chaos, it didn't take much effort to grow the spiritual herbs, no matter how time-consuming and laborious it was. The two of them came to a ridge, looking at the hundreds of 7-star blood orchids. Yu Qianqiu touched his nose and laughed, then walked to a row of blood orchids that had just grown and not yet matured, asked someone to dig out 2, put them in a wooden basin, and put them in his hands, looking at them with great interest. Bai Suzhen stared at his every move, then suddenly said, "Don't you have the recipe for 7 orifices exquisite pill? Why not refine some to help your parents prolong their lives?" Yu Qianqiu shook his head with a bitter smile, "Do you think I don't want to? I've already looked through the pill recipe several times, so I'm more familiar with it than you." This 7 orifices exquisite pill had the ability to seize the fortune of the heavens and earth. After consuming it, one would be able to compete with the heavens and earth for longevity. It was truly extraordinary. If he wanted to refine it, he needed a total of 3 main ingredients. Although he now had the 7-star blood orchid and the adumbra flower, he still lacked an extremely difficult to find spiritual herb called the resurrection grass. Adumbra guarding the spirit, soul recovery, and 7 stars bodybuilding. As long as one of the 3 was missing, it would be impossible to refine such a heaven-defying pill. But these 3 spiritual herbs are rare treasures that can only be found by luck. To be honest, I was lucky to obtain the first 2, but I really don't know if I will have the fortune to obtain all 3. Mortals can live for 50 years, and cultivators can live for 150 years. To be able to compete with the heavens and earth in terms of lifespan, this kind of elixir is indeed heaven-defying. Bai Suzhen said it herself, feeling a little incredulous. If there really was a 7 orifices exquisite pill in the cultivation world, I'm afraid the entire cultivation world would be stirred up by a storm of blood. Especially those cultivators at the end of the tribulation transcendent stage. Although they have lived for hundreds of years, how many of them would be willing to return to the earth after hundreds of years of bitter cultivation? The temptation of being able to live for another 150 years was not an ordinary one. It was even possible for old monsters of the soul formation stage to come out. This thing really isn't something that ordinary people can enjoy. As Yu Qianzhou said this, he also laughed. Just think about it, how could he resist the temptation of increasing his lifespan by 150 years? If he knew which family had it, he was afraid that the hero would turn out in full force to snatch it. Then where does this resurrection grass grow? The pill recipe seems to have introduced the characteristics of each spiritual herb, right? Bai Suzhen asked. She had more or less seen it when she removed the restrictions on the pill recipe. Yu Qianzhou smiled and said, according to the pill recipe Jade Archive, this recipe was passed down from ancient times and didn't originate from the alchemy sect. Later on, no one has succeeded in refining it. The ancient records of the resurrection grass referred to it as the 9 underworlds. Bai Suzhen frowned and pondered, which place in this world is called the 9 underworlds? Yu Qianzhou shook his head and said, the pill recipe Jade Archive didn't record it in detail. It was just casually mentioned, so I didn't know about it before. But... His expression changed, and he laughed mischievously, but when the Wu family's patriarch, Wu Sihai, saw my ghost king's token, he mentioned a place, and it immediately made me realize. If I didn't guess wrongly, the 9 underworlds is the place he mentioned. Sister, have you heard of the 9 underworlds cavern? Hearing this, Bai Suzhen was shocked and said, you mean the 9 underworlds cavern, which is divided into 9 levels? Yu Qianzhou nodded and said, that's right. Wu Sihai was talking about that place. I'm guessing that the 9 underworlds cavern is the 9 underworlds cavern. Bai Suzhen was startled and said, if the resurrection grass really grows in the 9 underworlds cavern, who in the world can harvest it? Legend has it that the 9 underworlds cavern is connected to the netherworld, which is as famous as the immortal realm. Chapter 260. The last time Yu Qianzhou stayed in this room, he had hidden a teleportation mark. As soon as he came out, he found Wu Lixue in a daze, talking to herself. He appeared in front of her, but she actually ignored him. It was quite depressing. Wu Lixue shook her head again, it must be an illusion. She continued to walk out. Yu Qianzhou's expression twitched, he couldn't help but grab her arm, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Am I invisible? Ah! Wu Lixue rubbed her eyes in disbelief, she was dumbfounded. It's really you, Yu Qianzhou, when did you come? Yu Qianzhou stretched out a hand and waved it in front of her eyes. Seeing her eyes following his gesture, he heaved a sigh of relief. I thought there was something wrong with your eyes. Wu Lixue slapped his hand away, and said angrily, there's something wrong with your eyes. Hee hee. How could there be something wrong with my eyes? Yu Qianzhou joked, his eyes occasionally glancing at her full and perky breasts. He was extremely envious of the egg in her arms. After secretly looking at it, he asked with a smile, "Your egg hasn't hatched yet?" Wu Lixuan no longer had that dejected look. She threw the egg into her storage pouch. She didn't want to let the egg take the limelight. She asked excitedly, "When did you come?" "Just arrived." "Come, bring me to see your grandfather," Yu Qianzhou said as he walked out. "Just arrived." Wu Lixua was full of doubts. She bounced to the front to lead the way, and asked as she walked, "Do you need something from my grandfather? How long are you staying this time? Do you want to play with my brother for a bit longer?" Wu Lixua kept asking questions, while Yu Qianzhou stammered in response. He didn't pay attention to what she was saying at all. His eyes were fixated on the sexy but in front of him, unable to move away. Wu Lixua, who was walking in front, turned around unhappily when she heard Yu Qianzhou's words. She immediately noticed Yu Qianzhou's gaze and her pretty face turned red. She immediately turned around and silently walked forward. It was hard to tell if she was angry or shy. She no longer dared to jump up and down. Even her normal walk was a bit unnatural. Outside the Wu clan ancestral hall, Wu Lixua explained the purpose of her visit to the gate, and the guard immediately went in to report. After a while, Wu Sihai came out with 3 old men laughing and said, "Yu Qianzhou, this old man has been looking forward to seeing you." He then frowned and said, "What's going on with the clan's guards? Why did you only report now that you're here?" Yu Qianzhou laughed and vaguely said, "Wu Lixua brought me here." He naturally wouldn't say that he snuck in. Wu Lixua nodded dumbly, "Grandfather, I brought him here." "You are Yu Qianzhou?" one of the old men behind Wu Sihai asked. Hearing this, Yu Qianzhou also looked at the 3 old men. Looking at their clothing, they should be from the other 3 clans. "Yes, he is Yu Qianzhou." Wu Sihai introduced both sides. "The 4 clans' leaders are all here." Yu Qianzhou bowed, "Greetings to the 4 seniors." "Well said." The 4 nodded. Wu Sihai waved his hand, "Let's go, we'll talk inside." The 5 of them entered the Wu clan's ancestral hall together. Outside, Wu Lixua stomped her feet, pouting unhappily. Who told her to be a woman, and the clan rules forbade women from entering? As she paced back and forth, she recalled Yu Qianzhou's gaze. Her pretty face couldn't help but turn red, and she left as if she was fleeing. Aside from Wu Sihai, the other 3 were constantly looking at Yu Qianzhou, wanting to see what was so special about Yu Qianzhou's fame. Yu Qianzhou's gaze returned to the portrait of Bai Changchun in the main hall. Thinking about the possibility of meeting this legendary character in the demon domain, his heart surged. Wu Sihai broke the silence, laughing, "Yu Qianzhou, you came here to fulfill your promise to this old man." Yu Qianzhou turned his head, "Yes, I have to fulfill my promise." "I heard that you are very familiar with the demon domain. What should we prepare for this trip?" Bai Shouji asked. This time, he was going to look for his ancestor. It could be said that his mood was the most indescribable. "I can't say I'm familiar with it, I've only been there before. As for the preparations, you can just send someone with me." "With me around, there shouldn't be any danger," Yu Qianzhou said indifferently. What big words! Was the demon domain a place to be trifled with? The 4 exchanged looks. Wu Sihai was very confident in Shaoqin. He chuckled, "How many people should we send?" Yu Qianzhou pondered for a moment, then said, "We don't need too many people. If there are too many, it might cause unnecessary trouble. Just send a few people that the 4 clans can trust." The 4 exchanged looks and nodded at each other, as if they had reached some kind of agreement. Wu Sihai said with a smile, "Yu Qianzhou, how about the 4 of us go with you?" "Ah." Yu Qianzhou was stunned. His original idea was that it would be best to get Bai Zizong and the others to go. He had a good relationship with them, and he believed that the journey would not be lonely. However, the 4 old guys obviously wanted to take over his place. He nodded and said, if the 4 seniors want to go, this junior naturally has no objection. Good. Wu Sihai clapped and said, then when do you think we should set off? No hurry, I still have something to ask seniors' help with. Yu Qianqiu said as he took out 2 pots of 7-star blood orchids with a smile and placed them on the table beside him. He said, Senior, please help me auction these 2 things. Wu Sihai stared at the 2 pots of blood orchids and was a little stunned. He had handled such things before, so how could he not recognize them? The other 3 saw his appearance and did not know what kind of treasure it was. They walked over to observe it together. Didn't you buy one last time? Why are you selling 2 pots this time? Wu Sihai saw at a glance that these 2 pots of blood orchids were not the original pot. The pot in the grand auction was obviously more mature than these 2 pots. Hee. I'm short of money recently. Senior, please spread the news that the Wu family wants to auction the 7-star blood orchids. It is best to auction these 2 pots of blood orchids at a later time. This junior wants to sell them at a good price. Yu Qianqiu smiled apologetically on the side. 7-star blood orchids. These 2 pots are 7-star blood orchids. The 3 onlookers were surprised in unison. I've let the seniors see a joke. I'm really short of money. Otherwise, I wouldn't take out such a treasure to auction. I'm sorry, hee. Yu Qianqiu pretended there. Wu Sihai didn't believe that he had no money. He was looking at him up and down, not knowing what he was doing. The other 3 naturally heard about Yu Qianqiu's wealth from Wu Sihai, and they were a little puzzled. Leave the things here. I will let the Wu family handle it. The spirit stones from the auction will all be given to you without taking a single cent. It won't affect our trip to the demon ghost region. Wu Sihai might not know what he was doing, but he still agreed and didn't even want the commission. Sorry for the trouble. I'm short of money, so I can't help it. Yu Qianqiu apologized and smiled apologetically. Chapter 261. A shuttle-shaped artifact flew quickly from the Wu clan, and it was carrying Wu Sihai's group of 5. Yu Qianqiu sat at the stern and sized up the entire artifact. He clicked his tongue and said, the Jing clan's artifact refinement skills are indeed worthy of their reputation. This artifact is better than those sold outside. The decorations are beautiful, and the flight speed is so fast. Even the seat is more comfortable. Not bad, not bad. Wu Sihai looked at Jing Feihong, who was personally controlling the artifact, and smiled. It might be good, but the materials used are also frightening. Yu Qianqiu opened his mouth and wanted to say that it was fine if it was expensive as long as it was suitable. However, when he recalled how he complained about being poor, he kept his mouth shut. He was pondering if he should ask Jing Zhua to get one for him to play next time. According to their estimations, it would take more than a day to reach the demon ghost region. Yu Qianqiu sat at the back and checked the core formation in his dantian. Ever since his core had absorbed the fire element, it was as if there was a fire seed inside. His entire core was activated. He didn't need to cultivate, and he could absorb the true essence to solidify. His dantian continuously absorbed the true essence day and night, causing Yu Qianqiu to absorb the spirit qi in the spirit stones and refine it into true essence. Right now, he had nothing to do, so he secretly pinched a piece of spirit stone to replenish the qi in his body. He didn't know when he fell asleep, but when the heroine of the dream, Wu Lixue, was sacrificing herself, he suddenly heard someone calling him. Yu Qianqiu opened his eyes unwillingly, and it was Wu Sihai who called him. He swallowed the saliva in his mouth and thought, if only it was a little later, your granddaughter would be naked soon. He smacked his lips and said, what is it? The four of them looked at each other and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. They were about to enter such a terrifying place like the demon ghost region, but this fellow wasn't worried at all and could even sleep. On the other hand, the four of them felt relieved. Originally, they were worried that Yu Qianqiu was bragging, but when they saw him being so relaxed and confident, they felt more at ease. Wu Sihai waved his hand and pointed at the flying shuttle and said, "The demon ghost region is in front. Which direction should we go?" "So soon?" Yu Qianqiu got up in a daze and walked to the head of the shuttle. In front of him, the land was covered by a boundless gloomy fog. Compared with the bright sunshine behind the shuttle, it was like another world. Standing on the flying shuttle in the air, he could occasionally hear the gloomy and horrible screams coming from the gloomy fog. This scene was so familiar. Where else could it be other than the demon region? We've also entered the outskirts of the demon ghost realm, but we don't dare to go any deeper. I heard that the top 3 sects of the righteous and demonic paths would send their disciples to compete in the demon domain every few years. I don't know if that's true or not, but I always felt that it was strange. However, it was not a good place to investigate. You have stayed on supporting Immortal Island before, so you should know something, right? Wu Sihai asked. *T competition. Yu Qianqiu looked ahead and identified the direction they were heading in. He sneered and said, "It's just nice words. The top 3 sects of the righteous and demonic paths send their disciples here to gain experience and use the demon ghost region to temper their disciples. Originally, they could just train separately, but this place is too dangerous. Even if the weaker sects work together, the more people they have, the easier it is to attract more demons and ghosts, making it more dangerous. However, even supporting Immortal Island can't handle it alone. Therefore, the top 3 sects of the righteous and demonic paths gathered together and come here every few years. They even made up a lie to deceive the righteous and demonic paths. However, the last time they came here, they encountered some trouble. I'm afraid they won't dare to come again." In any case, he was no longer a disciple of supporting Immortal Island. Moreover, he couldn't wait for the righteous and demonic paths to be in chaos. Naturally, there was no need to hide it. Yu Qianqiu turned back and smiled at the four of them. "Do you know what trouble the 6 sects encountered?" The four of them shook their heads. He stared at the four of them and chuckled. They were beaten up by a single person. 5 consecrators and 10 elders of supporting Immortal Island were injured at the same time. "Do you know who injured them?" "It's none other than the person you are looking for." "Ah!" The four of them exclaimed at the same time. Bai Shouji was so excited that his body trembled. He said, "Is the person you are talking about our ancestor?" "That's right." Yu Qianqiu nodded and said, "It's your ancestor, Bai Changchun. Your ancestor is amazing. TSK. That level of cultivation really leaves people speechless." Hearing that, the four of them breathed heavily. They stared ahead and seemed a little impatient. "The flying shuttle can't fly too low. Try to fly as high as possible. Otherwise, it will be easy for us to be attacked." Yu Qianqiu raised his hand and pointed to the left. He said, "It's that direction. Fly as fast as you can. Soon, you will see a tall mountain that pierces through the clouds. That is the Cloudy Sky Peak. We will land on the peak." "Got it." Although Jing Feihong was old, he still couldn't hide his excitement. The flying shuttle quickly soared into the sky and suddenly accelerated. It turned into a stream of light and flew in the direction Yu Qianqiu pointed. About 2 hours later, a towering mountain appeared in front of them. The four of them looked at each other and nodded. Yu Qianqiu really wasn't talking nonsense. The flying shuttle flew at full speed. Soon, it reached the peak and slowly descended. "Come down. If we want to go deeper, we can only walk." Otherwise, we won't be able to guard against sudden dangers. Yu Qianqiu said and jumped down first. The others followed. Jing Feihong put away his flying artifact. Yu Qianqiu looked around. After identifying the direction they went down the mountain last time, he waved his hand and led the others to go around. However, when they went around to the other side of the mountain, the 5 of them were stunned. Their expressions were full of disbelief. Under the bright sunlight on the mountain top, there was a palanquin made of green vines. The palanquin should have been covered with light muslin, but it was now rolled up. A scholarly man was leaning on the palanquin. He was holding a book in his hand and reading it under the sun. Not far from the palanquin stood 4 strong men. From their clothes, they seemed to be the subordinates of the man who was reading. The 4 of them stared expressionlessly at the people who had suddenly appeared. The 5 of them were shocked and looked at each other. There was actually someone reading in a place like this. It was a little too unbelievable. Wu Sihai and the other 3 looked at Yu Qianqiu. They didn't know if he knew who this person was. Yu Qianqiu hadn't seen this person the last time he came here. How could he be leisurely traveling in a place like this? Was this something an ordinary person could do? This place wasn't something an ordinary person could come to. His mind raced. After some analysis, he already had some suspicions about who this person was. However, he didn't dare to be sure. After all, anything could happen in this place. The man in the palanquin didn't seem to notice their arrival. After he finished reading the book in his hand, he elegantly flipped a page and held the book in his hand. He stood up, squinted his eyes, and stretched lazily. He turned to the others and smiled gently. It's rare for guests to come to the demon domain. I didn't expect to run into them today. Chapter 262. I didn't expect to meet such an elegant person at the cloudy sky peak of the Monster Ghost region. I really wonder if this place is still the Monster Ghost region. Yu Qianqiu looked around and said with a smile, there are 2 masters in this area. One is in charge of Yin and the other is in charge of Yang. Since you can be so carefree on the cloudy sky peak, could you be the Yang master, Demon King Aoli? The man's elegant expression changed slightly. He looked at Yu Qianqiu in surprise and asked doubtfully, who are you? How do you know my name? Ghost General Mang Yan mentioned you to me before, Yu Qianqiu said with a smile. Actually, he was just guessing. Although he knew that there was a monster king here, he had never heard Mang Yan mention Aoli. He only knew that the monster king here was called Aoli from Ferdinand. However, it was obvious that he had guessed correctly. Big brother mentioned me to you before. Aoli looked at him again and said doubtfully, could you be Yu Qianqiu? Yes, I am. Yu Qianqiu slowly raised the Black Ghost King token in his hand and said with a smile, it seems that General Mang also mentioned me to you before. When Aoli saw the Ghost King token, all his doubts disappeared. They looked at each other and said at the same time, it's an honor to meet you. As soon as the same words were said, both of them were slightly stunned. Then, they laughed at the same time. Wu Sihai and the others were shocked at first. They did not expect this person to be the demon king of this place. When they saw the 2 of them talking and laughing, they immediately felt relieved. This Yu Qianqiu was indeed not an ordinary person. The 2 of them walked closer while laughing. Their expressions showed that they appreciated each other. Yu Qianqiu stood in front of Aoli and sized him up again. He clicked his tongue in admiration and said, I'm going to say something that might make Senior unhappy. If I didn't know Senior's identity, with Senior's refined and elegant temperament, who would know that Senior is the demon lord of this place? Hearing this, Aoli's joyful expression was a little hard to conceal. Although he was a member of the demon clan, he had always admired the elegance of humans, so he imitated them in many ways. Yu Qianqiu's words could be said to have touched his heart. For a moment, he had a favorable impression of Yu Qianqiu. He waved his hand and patted Yu Qianzhou's shoulder. He laughed heartily and said, "What's there to be happy about? Since you are Brother Meng's friend, you are also my friend. If you have anything to say, just say it." In truth, Yu Qianzhou found it strange as soon as he saw him. It was not strange for a majestic demonic beast king to transform into a human form, but why was he dressed like a pedantic scholar? If there wasn't something wrong with his head, then he must be addicted to such things. Thus, he tried to flatter the other party, and sure enough, the flattery made the other party very comfortable. AI. Of all the things that are inferior, only studying is superior. Yu Qianzhou looked at himself and shook his head. He sighed and said, seeing Senior's elegant demeanor, "It really makes me feel ashamed of my inferiority. Of all the things that are inferior, only studying is superior." Aoli smacked his lips and his eyes suddenly lit up. Seeing Yu Qianzhou's ashamed expression, he immediately patted his shoulder and said with a smile, Brother Yu, there's no need to be like this. This kind of Tao of sourness is just my personal hobby. It's not worth mentioning, it's really not worth mentioning." Yu Qianzhou's inconspicuous flattery immediately made Aoli's spirit soar as if he had been injected with chicken blood. His face was in high spirits. It didn't look like he was comforting someone, it was clearly a blow to someone else. However, it could be seen that Aoli was indeed happy. In just a few words, the way he addressed Yu Qianzhou had already changed to Brother Yu. If Meng Yan heard Aoli say that his Tao was the Tao of sourness, he would definitely be dumbfounded. In the past, Meng Yan had casually said something like this, and Aoli almost fell out with him on the spot. But now, he was belittling himself. Not far away, the four bearers who were carrying Aoli's palanquin were also in disbelief. They had never heard Aoli belittle himself like this before. Such words were taboo for Aoli. Not to mention himself, others couldn't even mention it. The four of them looked at Yu Qianzhou with admiration. Wu Sihai and the others didn't know the details. Seeing Demon King Aoli and Yu Qianzhou calling each other brother, they could only sigh at Yu Qianzhou's remarkable abilities. His connections were so wide that he could even move freely in the demon ghost region. "Brother, cheer up. It's our first time meeting. Don't make it so unlucky." Aoli saw that he was still a little depressed, so he comforted him again. "Sister Yu Ji is full of praise for you. She said that you are so talented that even I can't compare with you. I was not convinced at first, but after hearing your song, Love Country More Love Beauty, I am convinced." At this point, if he continued to pretend, it would be a little pretentious. Yu Qianzhou coughed twice and said embarrassedly, "Song is just a strange and obscene skill. How can it compare with Brother Ao's true elegance? Let's not talk about it." He also hit the snake by the root and called him a Brother Ao. Aoli laughed and said, "Okay, let's stop here." Then he glanced at Wu Sihai and the others and asked, "Brother, what is your purpose in coming to the demon ghost region this time?" Yu Qianzhou's expression became serious, and he said, "I really have something to do here. I am going to the Valley of Evil Wind to ask General Meng for help." "Ha, you and I hit it off at first sight. In that case, I will go with you to the Valley of Evil Wind and ask for a drink from Brother Meng." Then he waved to the four people behind him and said, "You go back first." The four strong men respectfully took the order, lifted the green rattan sedan and left. Yu Qianzhou smiled and said, "I haven't been to the Valley of Evil Wind, so I don't know the way. If I can follow Brother Ao, it will save me a lot of trouble." "Brother, you are welcome." Aoli patted him and floated in the air. He raised his hand and pointed to the south, and said, "Let's go." Yu Qianzhou nodded to Wu Sihai and the others to follow him. A long sword popped out and carried him to fly after Aoli. Wu Sihai and the others were at the crossing calamity stage, so they didn't need to fly on a sword. They followed behind Yu Qianzhou at a distance. The 6 of them swooped down in the air, pierced through the dense clouds, and flew into the gloomy and terrifying demon ghost realm. Aoli flew beside Yu Qianqiu, and the 2 of them talked and laughed along the way. As for the 4 people following behind, Aoli didn't even bother to look at them, and he didn't even bother to ask who they were. The demon king had the arrogance of a demon king. Wu Sihai and the others didn't dare to interrupt. The prestige of the demon king gave them great pressure. This was the first time that Wu Sihai and the others went so deep into the demon ghost realm. They kept looking around and saw that there were all kinds of scary monsters, and they all stared at them greedily. But when they saw Aoli in front of them, they all hurriedly retreated. Some of them didn't have time to retreat and even knelt down to worship. Wherever Aoli went, all kinds of strange sounds would be heard, and no one dared to make a sound. The 4 of them were shocked. The prestige of the demon king was really not just for show. Aoli and the others all flew at the speed of Yu Qianqiu. It was already dark when they arrived at the Valley of Evil Wind. Fortunately, Yu Qianqiu was good at bragging, and Aoli regretted not meeting him earlier. Otherwise, how could he have the patience to accompany Yu Qianqiu to fly slowly? Wu Sihai and the others naturally didn't have any objections. Chapter 263. A mountain that stretched for dozens of miles seemed to have been fiercely chopped several times by the sharp weapons of the gods, and many cracks appeared on it. Shrill howls that sounded like the wailing of ghosts and the howling of wolves lingered in the air. A dense, gloomy mist had covered the entire mountain, which was tens of miles wide. Specks of ghost fire were drifting in the air, and chilly winds were constantly gushing out from the mountain mouth. This was the Yin Wind Valley, where Ghost General Meng Yan lived. Before they got close, they felt a little suffocated by the ghastly qi that came from the valley. The mournful Yin wind was like a bone-piercing cold knife. Although it didn't hurt them, it seemed like it could cut into their skin and penetrate deep into their bones. The surrounding temperature also seemed to have dropped to the freezing point, making people shudder. Their minds were also erratic, as if they could be blown away if they were not careful. Yu Qianqiu's cultivation was the lowest. He frowned deeply. This Yin Wind Valley was so powerful even before they got close. Wouldn't it kill me if we got close? Aoli was calm and at ease. Firstly, his cultivation was high, and secondly, he was very familiar with this place. After sizing them up, he said to Yu Qianqiu with a smile, "If mortals came here, the Yin wind could blow their souls out of their bodies, turning them into walking corpses. But it shouldn't be a big problem for you. As long as you stabilize your mind, the other abnormal feelings are just illusions caused by the dense Yin qi corroding your body. But this Yin wind is somewhat destructive, and you need to circulate your qi to resist it." Hearing this, Yu Qianqiu was relieved. It turned out that the most frightening mental swaying was an illusion. He immediately calmed his mind. Of course, he wasn't the only one who heard this. Wu Sihai and the others, who were horrified, immediately calmed down. They moved forward against the Yin wind. Aoli said with a smile while flying, "It is said that this Yin Wind Valley is the place with the densest Yin Qi in the entire demon ghost domain. Back then, when the Ghost King fought for this place, Brother Meng led the army to suppress them, and that's how he got this treasure land. Isn't it said that the 9th Netherworld Cave is the place with the densest Yin Qi?" Yu Qianqiu asked. Aoli shook his head and said with a smile, "The 1st to 8th Netherworld Caves are nothing in the demon ghost domain. The key is that the 9th Netherworld Cave is rare. Why do you think Brother Meng fought for this place back then? It is precisely because of the rare 9 Netherworld Cave under the Yin Wind Valley that this Yin Wind Valley would not have attracted so many heroes to fight for it back then. There's a Netherworld Cave here." Yu Qianqiu was overjoyed. His eyes lit up as he looked into the valley. When Wu Sihai and the others heard about the legendary 9th Netherworld Cave, they looked at each other in dismay. Even if they gained nothing from this trip, they would be able to leave a record in the clan register if they could learn about such a place. The 6 of them flew to the front of the valley and landed outside a valley that was shrouded in fog. Aoli shouted towards the valley, "Big brother, big sister, look who I've brought for you." The voice echoed in the valley. Not long after, Meng Yan's voice came from the deep valley, "Oh. Is there an esteemed guest coming? Welcome the guests." The "welcome the guests" was obviously an order. After the words were spoken, the thick fog at the entrance of the valley began to roll. After a dull sound, the thick fog separated to form a path into the valley. A group of people rushed out with flags fluttering on both sides. A general rode forward and cupped his fists towards Aoli and said, "Greetings, King Ao." The general looked at the so-called esteemed guest. After seeing Yu Qianzhou, he was startled and said, "Mr. Yu, it's you." This general was none other than Sai Zhangfei, the bearded man from last time. Yu Qianzhou smiled and cupped his fists. "Thank you again for sending me off last time. It's good that we are all acquaintances. Don't be long-winded. If you have something to say, let's talk inside." Aoli clapped his hands and smiled. Wu Sihai and the rest exchanged glances. Once again, they were impressed by Yu Qianzhou's wide range of connections. This fellow, be it human, demon or ghost, had dealings with them all. To them, it was a little unbelievable. "King Ao is right," Sai Zhangfei urged his horse to make way and waved his hand. "King Ao, please. Mr. Yu, please." He then glanced at Wu Sihai and the rest and said, "Everyone, please. Big brother, prepare the wine for me." Aoli laughed loudly as he walked towards the valley. Yu Qianzhou followed with a smile. However, the 4 old fellows were a little reserved. To them, they had never thought that they would be able to enter deep into the demon's domain. Even more so, they did not expect to be welcomed as an esteemed guest by the legendary ghost general. Just based on this experience, there were only a few in the entire cultivation world. After going back and recording it in the clan records, it would be enough for the future generations to admire them. Thinking of this, the 4 of them were a little excited. Finally, they were not as reserved as before. They followed closely behind Yu Qianzhou. The terrain in the valley was all the way downwards. Both sides and the ground were paved with fluorescent stones for illumination. After about 100 meters deep, the view before them suddenly became clear. A huge stone archway that was cut into the ground stood in front of them. 2 huge stone sculptures of servants were kneeling on the ground, standing on both sides of the archway. Both of their hands were placed on the braziers on top of their heads, which were burning fiercely. Behind the archway was an underground square. 2 rows of ghost soldiers holding axes crossed each other, forming a passageway. At the end of the passageway was a palace with an open door. The entire palace was richly ornamented. At first glance, one could tell that it was directly chiseled out from the entire mountain. It looked extraordinary, but in the darkness, it was eerie. It lacked the liveliness of a palace in the mortal world. Aoli walked towards the palace as if he had returned to his own home. Following behind him, Yu Qianzhou looked left and right, admiring the extravagance of this underground palace. The 4 old fellows did the same. They stepped on a long flight of stairs in front of the palace and ascended to the palace door step by step. Yu Qianzhou was a little surprised to find that there was a plaque on the palace door. Logically speaking, the name of some palace or hall should be engraved on it, but the plaque was smooth, without a single word, which made people feel a little strange. After entering the main hall, the interior was no different from the interior of an ordinary palace. However, it exuded an ancient and simple and vigorous aura. There was only one word to describe it: grand. In front of a throne high up in the middle was a majestic general clad in golden armor. He held onto a long sword with both hands and looked at the crowd coldly, giving the people below a feeling of looking down on them from a higher position. Beside him, there was a charming woman looking at everyone with a smile. Wu Sihai and the rest looked at each other, feeling a little uneasy. From the other party's disdainful aura and his position, it was needless to say that this person must be the famous ghost general in the cultivation world. They stopped in front of the stairs under the throne. Aoli pointed behind him and said with a smile, "Big brother, look who I've brought for you." Naturally, Meng Yan had already seen Yu Qianqiu. He only nodded at him, but his eyes were unusually sharp and cold when he stared at Wu Sihai and the rest. A red and black murderous aura overflowed from his body that was covered in golden armor, carrying a powerful aura that pressed down on the four of them. Wu Sihai and the rest were shocked. When they looked at Yu Qianqiu for help, they did not forget to circulate their qi to resist. Yu Qianqiu was a little dumbfounded. He guessed that Meng Yan wanted to show off his general's prestige in front of strangers again, but he dared to act cool in front of them without finding out who these four people were. When he found out who was behind these four old fellows, let's see how you can show off later. However, he was the one who brought them here, so he could not stand aside and watch the show. Chapter 264. The red and black baleful aura stopped above Yu Qianqiu and started to attack, looking like it was about to pounce. Meng Yan stared down and said in a low voice, "My Ghost King Hall is not a place for outsiders to enter. Mr. Yu, get out of the way. Don't hurt the friendship between us." What a shameless thing. Yu Qianqiu's face darkened, but Yu Ji was still smiling without saying a word, while Aoli turned his head to the side, acting like it was none of his business. In fact, it was not that Ghost General Meng Yan wanted to show off, but the demon ghosts trapped in the demon ghost domain were extremely unbalanced. They couldn't get out, but they couldn't let outsiders enter the demon ghost domain. Even if they didn't kill them, they had to teach them a lesson. However, how could Yu Qianqiu allow him to attack Wu Sihai and the others? Even if he gave up on 10,000 reasons, just the fact that they were Bai Changchun's descendants and that they might be of help to him in the future made it worth it for him to protect them. Hee. Very good. General, how are you going to deal with them? Yu Qianqiu sneered. If it were anyone else, I would kill them without mercy. But since they are Sir's friends, I naturally have to give them face. Meng Yan stared at the four of them and said expressionlessly, "Why aren't you kneeling when you see me? If you're late, you might lose your head." Hearing this, the four of them were shocked and terrified. But they were the heads of the four major clans in the cultivation world. Although death was scary, how could they throw away their dignity? Asking them to kneel was absolutely impossible. They had their pride hidden in their hearts. Humiliating their ancestors was something they wouldn't do even if they died. Among the four people, Bai Shouji took a step forward and said in a low voice, "Ghost General, if you don't welcome us, we can leave. Why should we kneel? Humph. Let's go." The last sentence was directed at Wu Sihai and the others. The four of them immediately turned around and left. From this, it was clear that Bai Shouji was the one in charge of the four. "How dare you!" Aoli turned around and shouted fiercely, his eyes flashing. Meng Yan laughed wickedly and said, "Mr. Yu, it's not that I don't want to give you face, but your friends don't want to give me face, so don't blame me for being impolite." As soon as he finished speaking, the red and black baleful qi that was about to leap over Yu Qianqiu's head and attack the four of them. Meng Yan is courting death. Yu Qianqiu roared. He raised his hand and a fiendish red flame was released, immediately blocking the path of the baleful aura in the air. The temperature in the hall suddenly rose to a frightening level. Aoli and the others immediately felt that the fire Yu Qianqiu had released was not normal. It was definitely not an ordinary fire, otherwise, the temperature would not be so high. This fire seemed to be beyond the scope of ordinary fire, with an all-conquering yang ferocity. As ghost cultivators, Meng Yan and Yu Ji immediately felt uncomfortable when they were illuminated by this fire, as if they were exposed to the scorching sun. However, Meng Yan's cultivation was not something that Yu Qianqiu could compare with. When he heard Yu Qianqiu's presumptuous words, he raised his eyebrows and let out a muffled snort. The baleful aura rushed over with a whoosh, wanting to extinguish the fire. However, he had forgotten that there was a saying in this world that there was a counter to everything else. He was a ghost cultivator, so although the baleful aura he released was vicious, it was also an item of extreme mean. Moreover, the fire that Yu Qianqiu released was close to extreme yang, so naturally, it could restrain his baleful aura. Once the baleful aura came into contact with the fire, it would dissipate without a trace. Yu Qianqiu was rather angry. Previously, he had boasted to Wu Sihai in the Wu clan, saying how good his relationship with Ghost General was. He didn't expect that after he brought them here, Ghost General would immediately make a move, and it was simply a slap to his face. Seeing that the fire that he released could restrain the baleful aura, he immediately opened his palm, and boundless fire surged out, rapidly wrapping the baleful aura into a circle in the hole. Meng Yan's body shook, and he immediately felt that his divine senses had lost contact with the baleful aura. He exclaimed in his heart, "Such a powerful fire." When Bai Shouji and the others saw that Yu Qianqiu had started to fight with Ghost General for them, they exchanged glances and immediately flashed back to Yu Qianqiu's back. They held their swords and were ready to help at any time. They also knew that if something were to happen to Yu Qianqiu, they wouldn't be able to walk out of this Yinfeng Valley by themselves. In just an instant, the baleful aura that was wrapped by the raging flames didn't have any resistance, and it was cleansed in the blink of an eye. The hall was glaring red, and the merged raging flames in the sky looked exceptionally spectacular. It was like an inverted hourglass, and it turned into a line of fire with a swoosh swoosh. It was sucked back into Yu Qianqiu's palm. The raging flames were gone, and at this moment, the extreme yang qi that made Meng Yan and Yu Ji's palpitations in the hall disappeared. The couple and Aoli sized up Yu Qianqiu with astonishment. The three of them had never seen such a technique before. "I didn't expect Mr. Yu to be so secretive. It seems that I have underestimated Mr. Yu." Meng Yan sized up Yu Qianqiu with a re-examining gaze. He casually shook off the blood-red cloak he was wearing, untied the belt of the golden armor on his chest, and pulled off the cloak. Together with the long sword in his other hand, he threw it to Yu Ji and shouted, "I want to see what other abilities Mr. Yu has. Do you think I'm afraid of you?" Yu Qianqiu shouted on the spot. Boom! A ball of raging flames suddenly burst out from his body and wrapped his whole body in fire. He looked like a god of fire, and his momentum was no weaker than Meng Yan's. In fact, it was even stronger. In the fire, Yu Qianqiu suddenly turned around and cupped his fists respectfully to Bai Shouji. He said, "Senior Bai, please leave the hall first. I'm going to release the power of Star Flame." The four of them looked at each other. Bai Shouji nodded and said, "Be careful." As for Aoli and Meng Yan, when they heard the word Bai, they were startled. They couldn't tell what they were feeling. Yu Qianqiu noticed it and found it funny. These people were really afraid of Bai Changchun. They were even like this when they heard his surname. Later, when they found out that Bai Shouji was Bai Changchun's descendant, who knew what would happen? Although the matter could be easily solved, he still had to show others his ability. Otherwise, others would think that he was afraid of him. Face was not given by others, but earned by oneself. The strange flame on Yu Qianqiu's body began to fluctuate violently. Although the fire did not grow, the temperature in the hall was rising rapidly. It was as if the air in the hall was going to be sucked dry. Aoli, who was competing with Yu Qianqiu, was shocked. Even with his cultivation at the end of the tribulation stage, it was difficult for him to resist such high temperature. What kind of flame was this? It was so powerful. Aoli retreated slowly without batting an eyelid. Yu Qianqiu sneered in his heart. It seemed that the fight would not happen. Not because of anything else, but because these old monsters were afraid of Baishoji. However, he was slowly forcing out the remaining fire elements in his body, pushing the temperature in the hall to the extreme. He did it for no other reason than to let them know how powerful he was. The temperature in the hall had reached an unbelievable level, but it was still rising. All the air that they breathed was exhausted. The air that rushed in from the outside was also concentrated on the flame on the surface of Yu Qianqiu's body, helping to increase the temperature. The metal utensils placed in the hall had silently turned into liquid and flowed. There was a crackling sound that sounded like a fire burning everywhere. Fortunately, the whole hall was made of stone. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. Meng Yan and Yu Ji panicked. Both of them realized that Yu Qianqiu's flame seemed to be able to restrain them. When the two of them were resisting the rapidly rising temperature, the yin energy in their body was disappearing rapidly. Yu Ji forced herself to calm down. She stuffed the cloak and sword back into Meng Yan's hands. She pouted and said, "General, look at what you're doing. Of all the jokes you can make, why would you make such a joke? Look, you've angered Mr. Yu." Chapter 265. After talking about her man, Yu Ji turned to Yu Qianqiu and said with a smile, "Sir, don't be angry. The general was just joking. Don't take it to heart." Joking? Yu Qianqiu knew that this woman had come out to smooth things over again. This was what this woman was best at. He didn't expose her because he didn't have much fire elements left in his body. He wouldn't be able to withstand such high temperatures for long. If this continued, he would definitely expose himself. He now regretted not replenishing his fire elements in Utopia before coming here. However, he had been worried that it would affect the temperature of the earth fire in his territory, and he hadn't found a place outside that could absorb fire elements. Furthermore, he knew that if they really fought, he wouldn't be a match for Meng Yan. Meng Yan could casually pick up a fire-resistant rock from the ground and smash him to death. The difference in their cultivation levels was too great. Furthermore, there was Demon King Aoli, who was like a brother to him. The reason why Yu Ji had come out to smooth things over was because he had addressed Baishoji as Senior Bai. He didn't know if there were any other reasons. Since there was a way out, Yu Qianqiu didn't need to put on an act. The temperature of the surrounding fire dropped rapidly, and it entered his body along with the demonic red flames. The remaining warmth in the hall was blown in by a few cold winds, and it quickly returned to its original coldness. However, there wasn't a single intact metal utensil in the hall. All of them had melted to the ground. Yu Qianqiu's actions undoubtedly showed that he believed Yu Ji's words. However, he still harumphed and said, "It's fine if I'm angry. If I anger someone else, I'm afraid you won't even have the chance to regret it." The few of them, who were already feeling uneasy, immediately felt that something was amiss when they heard this. They secretly exchanged glances. Meng Yan was quite adaptable as he chuckled and said, "Sir, are you really angry? We've known each other for a while. There's no need for us to fall out because of a joke, right?" "Of course not." Yu Qianqiu knew what was going on, but he still smiled. After all, it wouldn't be good for him to fall out. He still needed Meng Yan's help for some things. Furthermore, now wasn't the time to fall out. Seeing that the fire in the hall had been extinguished, Baishoji and the others stood guard behind Yu Qianqiu, on guard against Ghost General and the others. Yu Ji walked down the stairs with light steps and walked to Yu Qianqiu. She glanced at Baishoji and asked with a smile, "Sir, why didn't you introduce the friend you brought to me and the general?" Yu Qianqiu gave her a meaningful smile and did not say much. He turned to the four men and introduced, "This is General Meng Yan's wife, Lady Yu Ji. I hope you don't mind what happened just now. It's boring here without seeing the sun." He looked as if he wanted to slap himself. He was having a good time and had nothing better to do. Why did he come here? Wasn't he looking for trouble? Meng Yan swallowed his saliva with difficulty. He looked at Bai Shoji and said politely, "Mr. Bai, may I know the name of your ancestor?" Damn it! He was truly a tortoise who had hardened his heart and was still hoping for a fluke. Yu Qianqiu looked back and saw that Bai Shoji was looking at him. Obviously, he was asking for his opinion, so he nodded with a smile and said, "Senior, why don't you show the portrait passed down by your ancestor to General Meng? Maybe they know your ancestor and are willing to help us." Bai Shoji nodded and took out an ancient painting from his storage bag. He carefully unfolded it in front of Meng Yan and the others and said with a solemn expression, "My ancestor's name is Changchun." Just hearing this name caused the three demonic ghosts to tremble. They carefully looked at the painting and saw an elegant old man in a plain robe. He stood on a cliff with his hands behind his back, slightly tilting his head to look at the stars in the sky. The old man's otherworldly aura was vividly displayed on the paper. The Demon King and the Ghost King were raised by Bai Changchun. Naturally, they had seen Bai Changchun before. Who else could it be but Bai Changchun in the painting? The three of them were shocked. Meng Yan took a few steps from the throne. Yu Ji didn't dare to act like a girl anymore. Together with Aoli, the three of them knelt down in front of the painting in Bai Shoji's hand. Then, they kowtowed 3 times and said in a trembling voice, "I didn't know a mortal master's Dharma idol was coming. Please forgive us for not going out to welcome you." The three of them didn't even dare to raise their heads. They still knelt there obediently, waiting to be dealt with. Yu Qianqiu was really shocked. Wow! This Bai Changchun was too awesome. A painting could scare the three of them like this. It could be seen what kind of existence Bai Changchun was in the demon ghost region. It was 2F** King incredible, 2F** King awesome. Bai Changchun's painting had such great power. This was an expression that Yu Qianqiu had never dreamed of. He stood there with his mouth wide open. Chapter 266. Bai Shoji and the other three were first shocked by the actions of Meng Yan and the others, then they were shocked. They were not stupid, so they naturally knew what it meant for the three of them to kneel down. The four of them looked at each other blankly, stunned. Their first reaction was that Yu Qianqiu really did not lie to them. Their ancestor, Bai Changchun, was really still alive. There was no doubt that their ancestors' cultivation had indeed reached the legendary soul formation stage. For a moment, the four of them actually felt like crying, and their eyes were all misty with tears. As the masters of the 4 major families, the 4 of them had risked their lives to personally come to this extremely dangerous monster domain. The determination they had made was unimaginable to outsiders. The 4 major families were originally one, and they depended on each other. The reason why they could have their current status was that the 4 families had always adhered to the ancestral teaching of supporting each other. However, where there was interest, there would be conflict. Now that more than 2,000 years had passed, the families were far from being as peaceful as they seemed on the surface. The voices within them were getting louder and louder. To put it bluntly, it was because the power of the 4 families had always been in the hands of the current bloodline, and this bloodline was the absolute backbone of adhering to the ancestral teaching. They had always adhered to the ancestral teaching of supporting each other. Because of this mutual support, when one family was in chaos, the other 3 families would work together to suppress it. As a result, it was difficult for the disciples of the other bloodlines of the 4 families to get involved in power. Therefore, the ambitious people within the families were naturally very uncomfortable with the main teaching of supporting each other. They tried their best to abandon this ancestral teaching, and the matter had become more and more serious. Originally, they could have used ruthless means to suppress them, but they were not other sects, but the families. The consequences of using ruthless means against the clansmen of the same origin were very serious. There was too much internal friction, and the 4 major families were in danger of being swallowed by others at any time. At this moment, Yu Qianqiu suddenly brought the news that Bai Changchun was still alive. This was really great news for Bai Shouji and the others. Bai Changchun's prestige within the four major families was needless to say. If they could invite Bai Changchun back, all the difficulties would be easily solved. Therefore, this trip to the monster domain was made. Although Bai Shouji and the others knew how powerful their ancestor was, they did not expect him to be so powerful in the monster domain. This guy brought the ancestor here, but he did not explain it clearly to the ancestor. Yu Qianqiu was embarrassed by his stare. With a serious expression, he quickly changed the topic and said, "Since there is no problem, I will trouble General and Brother Ao to send some experts to see us off. The sooner we go, the sooner we can solve the problem. Senior Bai, don't you think so?" Bai Shouji cupped his hands and said to Meng Yan, "If it is convenient, I naturally hope to see the ancestor as soon as possible. I dare not. It is my duty to serve you." Meng Yan quickly returned the greeting and glanced at Yu Qianqiu. The latter turned his head to the side and pretended not to see. Since the matter had been decided, Meng Yan and Aoli did not dare to delay. They immediately went to make arrangements and left Yu Ji, the hostess, to wait for the others. All kinds of wine and food were continuously sent over by the servants. The few of them ate and drank while waiting for the return of the Ghost King and the Demon King. During the feast, Yu Ji dismissed the servants and personally poured wine for them. Her respectful attitude made the others feel a little embarrassed. After all, she was the famous wife of the Ghost General. Yu Qianqiu looked at her strangely. This woman was not simple. She was someone who could make decisions for the Ghost General, Meng Yan. Why was she so obedient now? She almost did not say anything, and her behavior was appropriate. Was she frightened by Bai Changchun? "Madam, I have a question," Yu Qianqiu suddenly said. Yu Ji smiled and nodded. "Sir, please ask." Yu Ji will tell you everything she knows. "Then I will thank you in advance." Yu Qianqiu cupped his hands and said, "Madam, have you heard of the resurrection grass in the demon ghost region?" Bai Shouji and the other three raised their heads in surprise. Obviously, they had heard of this thing too. "I have heard of it, but I have never seen it." Yu Ji smiled and said, "Legend has it that it grows in the Jiu Yuming cave under the Chilly Wind Valley, but no one has ever picked it because no one can enter the Jiu Yuming cave." The so-called Jiu Yuming cave was indeed the Jiu Yuming cave. Yu Qianqiu frowned and said, "Is the Chilly Wind Valley really so powerful? Can't General Meng go in with his ability?" Chapter 267. Although my general has reached the last stage of the Ghost King, he can only practice in the 8th underworld cave. It's impossible for him to enter the 9th underworld cave. Even if he becomes a ghost sage, he can only do it lightly. If he wants to enter the bottom of the cave, he must be at the last stage of the ghost sage. Yu Ji said with a smile. Yu Qianqiu nodded. He had heard of this before. Yu Ji's answer only made him more sure. He frowned and said, "Madam, do you mean that even if a human reaches the soul formation stage, he can't enter the bottom without reaching the last stage of the soul formation stage?" You may not know this, but the 9th underworld cave is the only passage open for ghost cultivators to enter the underworld. It's not for the so-called masters among ordinary cultivators. When Yu Ji said this, she left the banquet with light steps. A trace of bitterness flashed across her face. She sighed faintly and said, "In life, fortune and misfortune are uncertain. Some people encounter disasters or disasters. Among these people who die abnormally, there are often people with deep resentment. They don't want to erase the memory of this life and reincarnate, so it's difficult for them to enter the reincarnation. So they stay in the human world and turn to ghost cultivation, hoping to achieve success in cultivation and fulfill their last wish. Alas! My general is one of them." Yu Qianqiu said with a smile, "It seems that there are many people who share the same ideals as General Meng. For example, Madame and the hundreds of thousands of soldiers under the general's command. They still follow the general after death. It's really commendable. When people die, everything is empty. How many people can talk endlessly after death? If it weren't for the general's high prestige in the army, how many of those soldiers who died in the war would continue to follow the general after death? I'm afraid they would have already reincarnated." Yu Ji shook her head and smiled bitterly. Yu Qianqiu heard a little helplessness in her tone. He was slightly stunned and said, "Isn't it good to continue to be a ghost cultivator after death? I heard that ghost cultivators are immortal unless they encounter an external disaster. Then do you know what will happen to ghost cultivators if they encounter an external disaster?" After Yu Ji asked a rhetorical question, she replied with a smile, "After a ghost cultivator encounters an external calamity, his soul will scatter and his spirit will be destroyed, and he will never be able to reincarnate." The few of them looked at each other in dismay. Yu Qianqiu exclaimed, "How could this be? Mister, you're not part of it, so you don't know the reason." Yu Ji smiled bitterly and said, "Although ghost cultivators have an unlimited lifespan, the time it takes to achieve enlightenment is far beyond that of demons and humans. When humans and demons cultivate to the extreme, as long as they can withstand the test of heavenly tribulation, they can ascend to the immortal world. Even if he was killed by an external calamity, he could just reincarnate and become a new person. Ghost cultivators are different. Not entering the netherworld after death is already a heaven-defying action. After painstakingly cultivating to the extreme, they must enter the 9 nether cave and return to the netherworld. Only then will they have the chance to cultivate to fruition." The few of them had never heard of such a thing. It was simply unbelievable. Yu Qianqiu swallowed his saliva and asked, "You mean, even if ghost cultivators reach the late stage of ghost saint, they still have to return to the netherworld through the 9 nether cave to cultivate? Why are you so long-winded? What's so good about cultivating to fruition? Since they have the cultivation of the late stage of ghost saint and have an unlimited lifespan, why not stay in the human world and enjoy life?" Yu Ji looked at Bai Shouji and said, "Immortal Master Bai often said, if heaven has feelings, this sentence is the truth." After that, she turned her gaze to Yu Qianqiu and said, "Both humans and demons have a limited lifespan. If they don't achieve the great Tao, they will enter reincarnation. Although the lifespan of demons is much longer than that of humans, they will suffer more tribulations than humans to cultivate to fruition. If they are not careful, they will enter reincarnation. Do you really think that heaven can leave a cultivator with unlimited lifespan in the human world?" The so-called unlimited lifespan of ghost cultivators refers to having unlimited time to cultivate to fruition. It doesn't mean that they can live forever in the human world. Once ghost cultivators have the cultivation of the late stage of ghost saint, if they don't return to the netherworld through the 9 nether cave in time, they will immediately attract an irresistible tribulation that will directly destroy their souls, and they won't even have the chance to reincarnate. Damn! Yu Qianqiu screamed, "Then there's no room for discussion. We can only go back obediently. Everything is heaven's will. It's not easy to return to the netherworld. This may be the retribution of having an unlimited lifespan for ghost cultivators." Yu Ji smiled bitterly and said, "Even if a ghost cultivator at the late stage of ghost saint can safely reach the bottom of the 9 nether cave, he still has to open the 9 nether gate between the human world and the netherworld. Behind the gate is the way back to the netherworld, but the way back is not smooth. On the way, he will receive the baptism of the netherworld and get rid of the human spirit. If he is lucky, he can keep most of his cultivation and cultivate in the netherworld again. If he is unlucky, he will return to the reincarnation of a mortal ghost, and all his previous efforts will be wasted." Everyone sighed. They didn't expect that it was so difficult to be a ghost cultivator. Yu Qianqiu said quietly, "Then don't step into the late stage of ghost saint and continue to stay in the human world. Yuji bit her red lips and said resolutely, Yuji yearns for the prosperity of the human world. But if Yuji wants to be trapped in this demon domain forever, Yuji would rather cultivate to the late stage of Ghost Saint and open the 9 Nether Gate. At worst, she will reincarnate and be a human again. Baishoji and others were confused. They didn't understand why they had to be trapped in the demon domain. However, Yu Qianqiu understood. With a terrifying guy like Bai Changchun in the demon domain, who was not afraid of death, would try to walk out of the demon domain. No wonder Yuji wanted him to help her leave the demon domain. It turned out that this was the reason. Why doesn't Madam leave the demon domain? Baishoji finally couldn't help but ask the reason. As soon as she said this, Yu Qianqiu felt that something was wrong. This woman was very cunning. She wouldn't say a lot of things for no reason. Sure enough, a beautiful woman like Yuji immediately knelt down in front of Baishoji. Baishoji didn't know what to do. He asked her to get up again and again, but he couldn't even help her up. She was completely acting like a woman. Baishoji looked at Yu Qianqiu for help. Yu Qianqiu's teeth twitched and he said, Senior, why don't you listen to what Madam has to say first? After that, he looked outside and thought, damn it. Sure enough, they are a group of old foxes. I was wondering why they left a woman to greet a group of men. It is obviously not in line with the etiquette of this era. It turns out that they left this social flower to do public relations. Damn it. Before this matter was settled, General Meng wouldn't come back. Baishoji was helpless. He could only shake his head and said, Madam, if you have something to say, say it quickly. I really can't accept such a big gift. Yuji nodded and said, Mr. just asked me why I don't leave the demon domain. I really have some difficulties. Mister, do you know why the demon ghosts in the demon domain don't leave the demon domain? I don't know. Baishoji shook his head and said, Madam, if you have something to say, say it quickly. Otherwise, when General Meng comes back, I really won't have the face to face him. Yu Qianqiu sneered and thought, if you don't agree, her husband won't come back. Sorry to disturb you, mister. It's all my fault. But after you listen to me, I'm sure you will understand my difficulties. Yuji knelt and saluted. She said, it's not that the demon ghosts in the demon domain, including me, can't leave, but they don't dare to. Because anyone who leaves the demon domain without permission will be executed by the torture envoy. No one has ever escaped the punishment of the torture envoy. Torture envoy. Baishoji exchanged glances with the others and vaguely guessed something. It was also the first time that Yu Qianqiu had heard of this term, but he had already guessed who it was. Yuji explained, the torture envoy has existed since ancient times. It means the envoy who carries out punishment on behalf of the heaven. His cultivation is unfathomable, and he controls the life and death of the entire demon domain. If any demon ghost breaks out of the demon domain without his permission, he will definitely kill them. And this torture envoy is none other than Mr.'s ancestor, Immortal Master Bai. Baishoji and the others looked at each other. They didn't expect that their ancestor would abandon his family and get such a position in the demon domain. But they also understood what Yuji meant. She probably wanted him to beg the ancestor to let her out of the demon domain. But what was the use of agreeing to her? He didn't even know if the ancestor would recognize him. Seeing his hesitation, Yuji knew that he understood what she meant. She said anxiously, the reason why the torture envoy doesn't let the demon ghosts out is because he is afraid that they will disturb the human world. That's why he will punish them heavily. But I can guarantee that after I leave with the general and Aoli, we will live our lives obediently. We won't dare to do anything that goes against the torture envoy's wishes. Otherwise, we will be punished by the torture envoy and die without complaint. Please, mister, for the sake of my sincerity, plead with the ancestor to let the 3 of us out of the demon domain. Please, mister. After saying that, she kowtowed repeatedly. Chapter 268. This time, Baishoji was really in a difficult position. It was not that he did not want to agree, but he did not know what the ancestors' attitude towards him was. However, Yuji kept kowtowing, looking as if she would not stop until he agreed. There was no other way. Baishoji gritted his teeth and said, "I agree. Madam, please get up." Releasing 3 at once. Yu Qianqiu raised his eyebrows but did not say anything. It was none of his business anyway. Yuji kowtowed 3 times in a row and stood up with a face full of surprise. "Thank you, mister." "Thank you, mister." "Madam, don't thank me yet. To be honest, although I promised madam, I do not have the confidence to make the ancestor agree. I can only try. As for whether I will succeed or not, I cannot guarantee," Baishoji said helplessly. I understand. As long as Mr. is willing to say it, regardless of whether it succeeds or not, I, the general, and Aoli will be forever grateful," Yuji said indifferently. Since it was like this, Baishoji had nothing else to say. He looked at Yu Qianqiu with Wu Sihai and the other 2. Yu Qianqiu smiled at them. That old thing by Changchun was too scary. Before seeing him and understanding him, it was better not to express his opinion. Usually, this kind of old thing had lived for too long and was even more monstrous than a monster. Who knew what kind of eccentric character he would have? He was not related to him like Baishoji and the others, so it was better not to get involved in this matter. He had made up his mind to listen and watch more and try not to say anything to avoid getting into trouble. Yu Qianqiu raised his wine cup to the fore and smiled. "Drink, drink. Yes, please drink to your heart's content. I will pour the wine." Yuji, who was in a good mood, smiled like a peach and urged them to drink. After a while, Meng Yan and Aoli came together and bowed to Baishoji. "Mister, everything is ready. We can set off at any time. General, let me tell you a piece of great news." Yuji raised her wine glass and brought it over. She told the 2 kings what Baishoji had promised her. Meng Yan and Aoli glanced at each other, their faces filled with indescribable joy. Then, the 2 kings bowed to Baishoji. Meng Yan was pleasantly surprised. "Regardless of whether this matter succeeds or not, the 3 of us will never forget Mr.'s great kindness." As the 2 sides exchanged pleasantries, Yu Qianqiu drank his wine. In any case, he had a feeling that this matter would not succeed so easily. There might even be danger. "Who cares, I'll just run away first." "Yu Qianqiu, do you think we can move now?" Baishoji asked. From what he knew, Yu Qianqiu was more familiar with this place than they were, and he also had a mysterious background. There was no harm in asking for more advice. I'm fine with anything." Yu Qianqiu raised his glass and said, "In any case, I'm just here to join in the fun. Don't leave me behind." Wu Sihai, who knew him better, frowned. From what he knew, this brat would cause trouble wherever he went. When had he ever been so obedient? Baishoji turned to Meng Yan and asked, "General, why don't we set off now?" "All right." Meng Yan clapped his hands and smiled. "As you wish, mister. Let's go now." Everyone stood up, and Yu Qianqiu seized the time to drink 2 more cups of wine. He also swept a few jars of unopened wine to the side into his storage bag. He was prepared to let Guan Yu and the others have a taste of the ghost brewed wine. Then, he followed the others out of the Ghost King's hole. Meng Yan brought 4 Ghost Kings, while Aoli brought 4 of his sedan bearers. The 2 kings would personally escort them to the center of the monster ghost region. Yuji did not follow. Considering the difference in cultivation between Yu Qianqiu and the others, he would definitely not be able to keep up with the others. In order to take care of him, the group of 15 finally sat on Jing Feihong's flying instrument. After that, the flying shuttle flew quickly toward the center of the monster ghost region. Ghost General Meng Yan and Demon King Ao Li stood side by side at the head of the flying shuttle. With the two of them standing in front, all the demons and ghosts along the way retreated. No one dared to cause trouble. Everyone was excited to see Bai Changchun. Only Yu Qianqiu sat quietly in the corner at the back, sleeping. Wu Sihai looked back at him from time to time. After sleeping for a long time, Yu Qianqiu was suddenly awakened by the sound of fighting. He got up and asked for the reason. It turned out that they had already reached the territory of the other demon kings and the ghost king. The monster ghosts here would not give face to Meng Yan and Ao Li. However, the people brought by the two kings were all experts. Ordinary people could not stop them. Without the two kings taking action, the 4 ghosts and 4 demons could easily deal with them. Yu Qianqiu saw that the sky in the monster ghost region was already turning bright. He estimated that it was already daytime outside. Then, he looked at Meng Yan and the 4 ghost generals. They were not affected at all. He could not help but be amazed. Normally, ghost cultivators could not appear in the daytime. How could these 5 guys be fine? However, he did not know that in the monster ghost region, because it was shrouded in gloomy clouds and fog for a long time, the sun could not shine directly. Ghost cultivators with the cultivation of the Ghost King could walk normally. As for those with cultivation lower than the Ghost King, they would not be so lucky. In addition, in the case of direct sunlight, even the Ghost Sage could not do it. This was the power of the law of heaven and earth. Under the law, everything obeyed. Gradually, the island and the lake became clearer. After arriving above the island, the 5 people looked at the overall appearance of the island anxiously. It was not a big island. It was estimated to be about 1 kilometer in circumference. There were steep stone walls on all sides that plunged into the water. The stone walls were covered with vines that hung all the way to the water. The whole island was like a pier. The island was covered in lush greenery, and there were a few ancient buildings scattered in the center. However, there was nothing special about them. The only special thing was that the entire island was shrouded in a thin layer of mist. It was almost invisible under the sun. The few of them looked at each other anxiously. Was this the place where the famous Punisher lived? Since you are here, come down. Just when everyone was hesitating whether they should go down directly, they suddenly heard an old voice. They could not tell where the voice came from, but they knew it was from the island. This time, the few of them did not dare to hesitate anymore. They immediately landed and put away the shuttle, but they did not know where to go. At this time, a young man suddenly came out of the forest. The young man was thin, tall, and handsome. He rolled up his sleeves and pants, and carried a hoe on his shoulder. He was dressed like a farmer. Under everyone's shocked gaze, the young man walked over and said, "Come with me." His words were simple, but the few of them could not refuse, so they followed behind him obediently. The young man carrying the hoe led them to a few simple and elegant buildings. He found a place to put the hoe in his hand and led them into the hall of the largest house. He said, "Wait a moment, master will be here soon." After saying that, he went out. The few of them looked at each other. Could this person be Bai Changchun's disciple? Looking at the furnishings in the house, it could not be any simpler. The floor was covered with straw mats, but there was not even a chair to sit on, let alone a table. In short, it was empty. Just when the few of them were in a daze, an old man dressed like a farmer came in. The old man had a thin face, black hair, and a beard. He was in high spirits and looked younger than Bai Shouji and the others. The few of them could tell at a glance that this person looked exactly like Bai Changchun in the portrait. However, the aloof and arrogant expression in the portrait had been replaced by a calm and peaceful expression. He gave off the feeling of a kind grandfather. The four of them, who were in a daze, immediately knelt down and kowtowed, saying, "Greetings, ancestor." Yu Qianqiu felt that it was a bit dangerous to stand alone, or a bit inappropriate, so he quickly knelt down as well. "You are the current clan masters of the Bai, Tan, Jing, and Wu clans." The old man looked at the five of them and asked. No one knew where he got this information from. Bai Shouji, who was kneeling, straightened his upper body and said excitedly, "Ancestor is wise." The descendant of the Bai clan, Bai Shouji, greets ancestor. After saying that, he kowtowed again. The descendant of the Tan clan, Tan Ruchang, the descendant of the Jing clan, Jing Feihong, the descendant of the Wu clan, Sun Wu Sihai, greets ancestor. The other three followed and kowtowed again. The descendant of the Tan clan, Tan Ruchang, the descendant of the Jing clan, Jing Feihong, and the descendant of the Wu clan, Sun Wu Sihai, greets ancestor. The other three followed and kowtowed again. Although his voice was relatively weak, it did not escape Bai Changchun's ears. Bai Changchun was slightly stunned. He frowned and muttered, "The descendant of the Yu clan, Yu Qianqiu, greets ancestor." Although his voice was relatively weak, it did not escape Bai Changchun's ears. Bai Changchun was slightly stunned. He frowned and muttered, "The Yu clan. Which clan is the Yu clan from?" Hearing this, the faces of Bai Shouji and the other three twitched. What was this brat doing? Bai Changchun thought for a while but could not remember. He did not think about it anymore. He raised his hand and said, "Stand up." After the five of them respectfully stood up, he asked again, "Why did you come all the way here to find me?" Bai Shouji immediately and respectfully explained the current predicament the four clans were facing. He respectfully asked the ancestor to return and stabilize the situation. After Bai Changchun listened, he nodded and did not say anything. However, he saw the young man who had just left walk in with 4 swords in his arms. He placed them in front of Bai Changchun and left. Bai Changchun raised his hand and put up an index finger. The air in the central room suddenly fluctuated, and Bai Shouji and the other three immediately felt their bodies being shackled to the point where they could not move at all. As a huge pressure came gushing at them, the 4 of them spat out a mouthful of blood. Yu Qianqiu was shocked. He immediately wanted to flash back to Utopia, but he held back in the end. He decided to wait and see first. The blood that the 4 of them had spat out formed a ball and floated toward Bai Changchun. It stood up neatly on his raised index finger and gradually formed 4 big words: Bai, Tan, Jing, and Wu. Bai Changchun waved his finger expressionlessly, and the 4 bloody words landed on the point where the handles and blades of the 4 swords connected. He then quickly performed a series of hand signs on each of the 4 bloody words before raising his palm to send out 4 beams of light toward the 4 swords. After a series of spells were cast, the central room returned to peace. Bai Shouji and the other 3 looked a little pale as they looked at the patriarch in shock and bewilderment. Yu Qianqiu had seen everything clearly from the beginning to the end. He was staring at the 4 swords with bright eyes, and he was extremely excited. Since they came from the old man, they must be treasures. They must be good treasures. Bai Changchun raised his hand and waved, and the 4 swords floated in front of the 4 of them. After the 4 of them grabbed the swords in front of them hesitantly, he said slowly, "These 4 swords were casually made by a good friend of mine when he was playing here. Although they are not good treasures, it is not an exaggeration to say that they are inferior grade spiritual treasures. They should be enough for you. I've planted a blood curse on all 4 swords. Those who are not your direct blood relatives will not be able to unleash their power. These 4 swords are spiritual treasures. They are actually the legendary spiritual treasures." The 4 of them were shocked as they looked at the swords in their hands in disbelief. How many years had it been since a spiritual treasure appeared in the cultivation world? The four of them immediately knelt down and said excitedly, "Thank you, Patriarch, for bestowing the swords." Yu Qianqiu looked greedily at the treasures that the four of them held tightly in their hands. It was a pity that they were planted with some *T blood curse. Even if he could get his hands on them, he could not use them. "After you take these four swords back, you must use them carefully and abide by your duties. Do not be ostentatious and do not use them casually unless it is a critical moment. Otherwise, you will definitely attract trouble." Bai Changchun warned. "We will follow the teachings of the Patriarch." The four of them kowtowed again excitedly. Sigh. Bai Changchun looked at the four of them and suddenly sighed. "There is no eternal family clan in this world. This is the only thing I can do. You know yourselves well. All right. Go back. No matter what happens in the future, do not look for me again. Otherwise, I will not let you off easily." "Patriarch!" the four of them exclaimed in disbelief. Bai Changchun frowned, waved his hand and shouted. "Go! Don't make me say any more." The four of them hesitated for a while. They had just arrived and they had to leave. They were a little unwilling. After being shouted at by Bai Changchun again, they finally understood that the situation could not be reversed. With tears streaming down their faces, they kowtowed and said, "Farewell, Patriarch. Take care, Patriarch." After saying that, they stood up and slowly retreated out of the hole. Yu Qianqiu followed behind the four of them. He muttered in his heart, "Damn it. You four old things should not know what's good for you. Every time you come, you get a numinous treasure. If anything happens in the future, I will be unlucky. I have already called Patriarch, knelt and kowtowed. In the end, I had to accompany you all for nothing. I did not even get any reward. Sigh. Who asked me to not have a good ancestor?" Just as the few of them reached the door, Bai Shouji suddenly remembered what he had promised Mang Yen. He immediately turned around and took a few steps forward. He knelt and kowtowed to Bai Changchun. "Patriarch, I still have something to report to Patriarch." The few people at the door also stopped and turned around to look at him. Bai Changchun frowned and said, "What else do you have to say? Say it quickly and go back immediately." Bai Shouji was an old man, but he knelt there with a childlike expression. He said embarrassedly, "It was all thanks to the help of the ghost general Mang Yen and his wife and the demon king Ao Li that I was able to see Patriarch safely. Before coming here, I promised the three of them to ask Patriarch for a favor. The three of them asked you to beg me to let them leave the ghost region." Bai Changchun interrupted coldly. "Yes." Bai Shouji lowered his head in a low voice. Bai Changchun said expressionlessly, "Meng Yan and Ao Li left their posts without permission. I have already executed them. You don't have to worry about them. You can leave now." "Ah!" The few of them could not help but scream. Meng Yan and Ao Li were actually dead. How long had it been? They could still remember the scene of the two of them waving goodbye by the lake. Yu Qianqiu shivered all over. The old man looked kind, but he was a cruel and merciless person. Bai Shouji did not dare to say anything more. He obediently retreated. Just as they walked out of the door, they suddenly heard Bai Changchun say, "You can't go. Stay." Chapter 269. They turned around at the same time, but Yu Qianqiu's heart was pounding. He pretended that he did not hear anything and continued to walk forward. After a few steps out of the house, Bai Changchun's voice came again. "If you dare to walk again, I'll remove both your legs." Yu Qianqiu shuddered and immediately stopped. He turned around and smiled awkwardly. "Is the great ancestor calling me?" Bai Changchun ignored him and said to Bai Shouji and the other three in a deep voice, "You guys go, he stays." The four of them looked at Yu Qianzhou. They did not know why the great ancestor wanted him to stay. Although they were hesitant, they did not dare to dawdle and quickly left. When they passed by Yu Qianzhou, they shook their heads apologetically. They could only blame the great ancestor for being too powerful. No matter how good their relationship with Yu Qianzhou was, they did not dare to speak up for him. Wu Sihai even gave him an expression that said, "Good luck." The flying shuttle carried the four of them into the sky and quickly left. Below, Yu Qianzhou's eyes were reluctant to leave. He only turned around when the flying shuttle could no longer be seen in the sky. Bai Changchun's eyes wandered around his body and said with slight doubt, "That's strange. I can't see through your cultivation base. What's the reason?" Ever since Junior reached the Qi training stage, no one has been able to see through Junior's cultivation base. It should be natural. After Yu Qianzhou said that, he was suddenly stunned. He said in shock, "Senior, don't tell me that you want me to stay because you can't see through Junior's cultivation base. Natural? There's such a physique. I've never heard of it." Bai Changchun frowned and did not answer the latter question. Yu Qianzhou, who was standing opposite, immediately felt a divine sense that felt like it was solid, checking his body inside and out. It was as if there was a pair of hands touching his body. It made him uncomfortable, but he did not dare to resist. After the inspection, Bai Changchun shook his head and said, "I thought there was some kind of smokescreen that could fool this old man, but it seems like it's really natural." After saying that, he waved his hand at Yu Qianzhou and said, "There's nothing else, you can leave too." Ugh! Yu Qianzhou's face twitched. In his heart, he cursed Bai Changchun's 18 generations of ancestors. Just because of this, he made me stay, and now he's telling me to get lost. Isn't he too arrogant? You should at least give me some mental comfort. Unfortunately, the other party was too powerful, so he didn't dare to voice his anger. Yu Qianzhou gritted his teeth and bowed, "Senior, please understand. With my cultivation, it's really difficult for me to leave the demon domain alone. I wonder if Senior can. What does your cultivation have to do with me?" Bai Changchun's peaceful appearance hit a cold heart. He glanced at Yu Qianzhou and said coldly, "I didn't invite you here. How to leave the demon domain is your own business. If you continue to be long-winded, you can stay here forever." After saying that, he turned around and went inside. Yu Qianzhou wanted to say something but stopped. Previously, he wanted to ask if Shaoqin had any spiritual treasures or something like that. If he did, he could give Shaoqin one to protect himself so that he could leave the demon domain safely. However, Shaoqin didn't even give him a chance to finish speaking. Instead, he threw down a threat, which made Yu Qianzhou choke. Old bastard! Yu Qianzhou could only curse in his heart. He unsheathed the sword on his back and carried him into the air. Floating in the air, Yu Qianzhou glanced down resentfully. He thought to himself, "Old bastard, if you have the guts, don't die too early. Wait for me to come back and pay me back." With a flick of his sleeve, he was about to soar into the sky. However, before he could fly far, he suddenly felt that his body couldn't move at all. Then, a powerful suction force that he couldn't resist fiercely pulled him back. Damn! Yu Qianzhou let out a strange cry. Before he could react, he was pulled back to the ground like a kite on a string. When he reacted and wanted to flash back to Utopia, there was a loud bang, and his body slammed into the ground. He immediately felt dizzy and saw stars, and his mind lost all thoughts. He lay on the ground for a long time before he regained consciousness. All the bones in his body felt like they were broken, and he was in great pain. There was a hot liquid in his mouth and nose, making it impossible for him to breathe. He closed his eyes and held his breath, forcefully spitting out the liquid in his nose. After he could breathe again, he felt much better. He raised his hand with great difficulty to wipe the liquid flowing down his cheek. When he saw it, the back of his hand was bright red. "I'm injured." Yu Qianzhou's pupils immediately dilated. He endured the pain all over his body and clenched his teeth as he got up unsteadily. He gritted his teeth and looked for his enemy. He saw Bai Changchun looking at him at the door. Needless to say, he was the one who did it. Yu Qianzhou was hot-headed, and he immediately scolded, "Bai Changchun, you old fart. Did I ever offend you?" He stopped abruptly as he realized that the guy in front of him was a super powerful person who could take his life at any time. He did not dare to say anything and immediately locked his divine sense on Jin Zhu, ready to fight at any moment. Unless it was absolutely necessary, he would not disappear in front of Bai Changchun. Once he aroused this old fart's curiosity, he would not be able to show his face in the cultivation world anymore. With the other party's cultivation, it was hard to guarantee that he would not be discovered the moment he showed his face. Perhaps it had been a long time since Bai Changchun was scolded like this, so he was stunned by Yu Qianzhou's scolding. After a slight fluctuation in his expression, he calmed down again and said emotionlessly, "I happen to be lacking a farmer here. You don't have to leave. Just stay here and grow vegetables." "Grow vegetables?" Yu Qianzhou asked shyly, thinking that he had heard wrong. Seeing that Bai Changchun did not answer and went back into the house, his worried heart immediately relaxed. He was speechless for a while. He dragged his injured body and looked around, not knowing where to go. He felt like he had no one to turn to. At this time, the lanky young man dressed as a farmer walked in front of him and stared at Yu Qianzhou curiously. A trace of worship flashed across his face. Then, he smiled and nodded, "Are you okay?" "I'm called Healy, come with me." Yu Qianzhou was a little confused. He did not know what was going on. His mind was a mess. Seeing that the other party was friendly, he nodded and said, "I'm okay. I'm called Yu Qianzhou." "I know." The young man called Healy smiled and turned around. He waved his hand and said, "Yu Qianzhou, come with me." Yu Qianzhou called back the flying sword on the ground and hurried a few steps. His chest churned again. He felt a sweetness in his throat. He could not hold it in and spat out a mouthful of blood. Healy walked in front and turned his head to smile. "There won't be too much of a problem. Master knows when to stop." "Damn it. If you have the ability, you can try falling from such a high place." Yu Qianzhou rolled his eyes. Before leaving, he did not forget to venting his anger in the direction of Bai Changchun's room. But he did not know that Bai Changchun was frowning and muttering, "Strange. When this kid's chi revolved, why did I feel a burning aura? After looking carefully, I did not find anything." The two of them walked several hundred meters through the verdant forest. They came to a relatively flat but overgrown area. Healy pointed at the barren land with a radius of 100 meters. Healy smiled and said, "After your injury is healed, this land will be yours to cultivate. You can build a residence here. You can cut any wood you need on the island. After the house is built, I will send you the seeds you want to plant." Yu Qianzhou asked suspiciously, "Plant vegetables?" Healy turned his head and smiled. "Yes, plant vegetables. In the future, we can be companions." Yu Qianzhou stared blankly at the wasteland when he heard this. He was slightly unable to wrap his head around it, and he felt like he was dreaming. How did I end up growing vegetables here? Chapter 270. With the help of the Golden Pearl's mysterious effects, this injury was nothing. However, he still took a few days to recover. Naturally, he was afraid of arousing the suspicion of others, especially by Changchun. After recovering from his injuries, it would not be a problem for him to escape. Others might not be able to escape from Bai Changchun, but it was a piece of cake for Yu Qianzhou. However, he thought about it and did not do so. He could run for a while, but he could not run for the rest of his life. If the old fart was determined to capture him, he would probably not be able to leave Utopia in the future. It was said that none of the demonic ghosts that escaped from the demon domain were spared. They were all killed by the old fart. Just based on this point, the old fart definitely had a way of capturing people. However, this was not the most important reason why he did not leave. He still remembered what Bai Changchun had said to Bai Shouji and the others. The old fart had said that the 4 numinous treasures were the work of his friend. Could it be that there were only 4 of them? Even if there were only 4 left, didn't the old fart still have a friend who could refine them? In any case, he could not just leave like this. He had already knelt down, and he had even been injured by them. How could he not get some compensation for his mental damage? The charm of numinous treasures was immense. Yu Qianzhou had the idea of taking root here. After recovering from his injuries, he walked around the wasteland a few times and finally found a good spot to build a house. He had been recuperating outside for the past few days. No one had invited him to stay in the existing houses, so he did not dare to take the initiative to stay there. On the edge of the wasteland, there was a relatively high spot that was surrounded by a few tall ancient trees in the shape of a fan. Yu Qianzhou pondered for a long time. It seemed like this place was the best place to build a house. It was ventilated and bright, and there were trees on it for shade. He got to work immediately. A few flying swords flew out and flattened the selected place. Then, he dug 9 neatly arranged holes in a rectangular shape. He cut down a few trees and plucked their bare branches before burying them in the holes as a foundation. Then, he chopped down a large number of trees to make wooden planks. After getting a large pile of wooden planks, he began to build a house on the 9 pillars. The nails needed had long been made by Utopia's Chin Feng. After an entire day of clanking, a small wooden house that looked like a stilted building was completed. He climbed up and gave it a try. It felt pretty good. It was clean, tidy and sturdy. The smell of fresh wood would probably take a long time to dissipate. After the house was built, Cranley immediately came to congratulate him on his new home. He brought a large bag of seeds to congratulate him. Healy looked at the house that looked like a bird's nest on the pillar again and again, praising it for being beautiful. Yu Qianzhou opened the big bag that he had brought. Inside were things the size of eggs, so red that they were almost black. He estimated that there were more than 200 of them. They were boiling hot, like chestnuts that had just come out of the pot. Yu Qianzhou looked at the things in the bag and asked in surprise, "Healy, are these vegetable seeds?" "Yes, but it's not for us to eat." Healy hugged his chest with one hand and pinched his chin with the other. He stared at the bird's nest-like house with interest. "If it's not for you to eat, then what are they for?" Yu Qianzhou picked up a seed and observed it repeatedly. He frowned and said, "This is the first time I've seen such a big vegetable seed." "Healy, you're not deceiving me, right? You can grow vegetables with these seeds. They're clearly cooked. I reckon they've just come out of the pot." "Cooked? I can't believe you can say that." Healy rolled his eyes and stared at the house again. "What do you know? This is not an ordinary seed. It's the seed of the deficient flame mysterious fruit. The deficient flame mysterious fruit is the favorite food of the Nanming ancestors' mount, the fire dragon beast. What do you think we're growing? Radish or cabbage? Deficient flame mysterious fruit. Nanming ancestor. Fire dragon beast." Yu Qianzhou smacked his lips. His eyes suddenly lit up. This was the first time he had heard of these terms. He hurriedly asked, "Healy, quickly tell me what's going on. Why do you care so much?" For you, this is already beyond your level of understanding. It doesn't matter if you know or not. Healy curled his lips and said disdainfully. But. Healy withdrew his gaze from the wooden house. He looked at Yu Qianqiu and said with a smile, if you can help me build a wooden house just like this one, I don't mind telling you. Ah. Yu Qianqiu looked at his own nest and doubtfully said, I don't have a place to live. Why do you need this when you have a place to live? Healy spread his arms and waved them twice. He disapprovingly said, I'm from the demon race. 1,000 years ago, I was Master's mount, the white crane. After transforming into human form, Master accepted me as a disciple. A tree house like yours is suitable for me to live in. It's a waste for you to live in it. Just say it. Do you build it for me or not? If not, I'll build it myself. You're from the demon race. Yu Qianqiu looked at him and then looked at the treehouse. He immediately thought of the word bird's nest. No wonder he kept staring at his own nest. He immediately patted his chest and promised, I'll build it. Of course I'll build it. But it's getting late. I'm afraid the house won't be beautiful in the dark. Tomorrow. You pick the place yourself. I promise I'll build a good house for you. That's more like it. Knowing such a secret, this trip to the demon region was really not in vain. Yu Qianqiu let out a breath and relaxed. He asked, how long until the Eastern Holy Land opens? About 5 years. Healy let out a long sigh, then said with a solemn expression, the deficient flame profound fruit takes about 2 years to mature, so we only have 2 chances to ask the Nanming ancestor to refine a spiritual treasure. This time, we must try our best to make the Nanming ancestor stay for more time. That way, the chances of refining a high-grade spiritual treasure will be higher. Chapter 271. Yu Qianqiu nodded, his heart pounding. He wondered if it was possible to get a superior-grade spirit treasure. He said absent-mindedly, there are 2 more chances. Senior Bai should be able to get his wish. Although it's 2 chances, there's only 1. Healy shook his head. Yu Qianqiu came back to his senses and asked, why? The key is that the materials for refining superior-grade spirit treasures are hard to find. Master has been preparing for more than 100 years for this refinement. Think about it, how can he prepare another batch of materials in just 5 years? Even now, in order to be fully prepared, Master often goes out of the demon region to search for materials. Healy sighed. That's true. Yu Qianqiu replied, but his heart skipped a beat. So Bai Changchun goes out often. The way he looked at Healy was a little strange. He did not know if this brat really thought that he could not escape, or if he was simple-minded. He simply answered every question and spoke without restraint. It was possible that both were true. This kind of opportunity could not be wasted. Yu Qianqiu rubbed his nose and looked around, then asked absent-mindedly, that Nanming ancestor couldn't be a soul formation cultivator, right? How many soul-forming cultivators are there in the entire cultivation world? Yes. Although the Nanming ancestor's cultivation isn't as good as Master's, he's at the mid-stage of soul-forming. Otherwise, how could he refine superior-grade spirit treasures? If one's cultivation isn't good enough, it'll be hard to control them, let alone refine them. Healy paused and thought about the latter question. He then said, as for how many soul-forming cultivators there are in the cultivation world, it's hard to say. Usually, cultivators who have reached this stage are at least 1,000 years old. They've already seen through the world and don't want to show their faces in public. They're focused on cultivation and pursuing the path of ascension. No one knows how many there are. There are also soul-forming cultivators and ghost sage cultivators. They're not like Master, who was entrusted by the previous torture envoy and is tied down by the demon region. The corner of Yu Qianzhou's mouth twitched. He thought to himself, tie my ass. Whoever makes me unhappy, I'll just kill them cleanly. Damn it. He thought so in his heart, but he still nodded in agreement on the surface. Then, he asked in confusion, where did the previous torture enforcer go? Dead? I don't know. After the previous generation found his master to succeed him as the torture envoy, he went to the Eastern Holy Land and never came back. Maybe he found a way to ascend to the late stage of soul formation, or maybe he was trapped in the Eastern Holy Land and passed away. Cranley said. What? Can the Eastern Holy Land trap a soul formation cultivator? Yu Qianzhou was puzzled. Do you think the heaven and earth universe formation is a joke? This was the #1 formation since the beginning of time. Once this formation is set up, it can communicate with heaven and earth and coincide with the universe. It can only be broken if the universe turns upside down. If it can block it, then it can naturally trap a soul formation cultivator. Every 300 years, the opening time is only 3 days. If someone doesn't come out in 3 days, then they can only come out after 300 years. However, I heard that it's very dangerous inside. It's hard to say if the person trapped inside can survive until 300 years later. Cranley said. Seeing that he was talking about it with great interest, Yu Qianzhou asked suspiciously, have you been in there before? Otherwise, how do you know so much about it? Cranley rarely had the chance to educate someone, so he was stunned when he heard Shen Ying's question. A trace of embarrassment flashed across his face, and then he said frankly, of course I heard it from Master. If I wasn't at the mid-stage of passing calamity, how would I dare to enter that place? Yu Qianzhou didn't dare to ask further. If he made the other party unhappy, it would be difficult to ask more questions. It was rare to meet such a pure person. Then he thought of the swords that Bai Shouji and the other 3 had obtained. He didn't care about other questions for the time being. What he was most concerned about was the spirit treasure. He said, it shouldn't be the first time Nan Ming ancestor helped Senior Bai refine a treasure, right? Although his attitude was sincere, after being hit by him, Cranley no longer had any interest in continuing this topic. Instead, he taught Yu Qianzhou how to grow the black flame profound fruit, making the latter extremely depressed. It was all because he couldn't keep his mouth shut. There was no other way, he could only wait for another opportunity to ask. The news that Ghost General Meng Yan and Demon King Aoli deserted their posts and were executed had quickly spread throughout the Demon Ghost domain. Bai Shouji and the other 3 people drove the flying shuttle unimpeded all the way. When they were about to leave the Demon Ghost domain, they once again went to the Chilly Wind Valley, preparing to tell Yuji about Meng Yan and Aoli. Who knew that the latter already knew about this matter, and was ordered by Bai Changchun to take over the duties of the Ghost King here. Meng Yan was dead. It would be a lie if Yuji said that she wasn't sad. After all, they had been together for so many years. Although the tragedy was caused by the 4 people in front of her, she didn't dare to look at them, because she really didn't dare to provoke them. Instead, she forced a smile. After learning from them that Yu Qianzhou was detained by Bai Changchun, Yuji smiled bitterly and sent the 4 people out of the Demon Ghost domain. It was all a disaster caused by a moment of greed. It seemed that her last hope of leaving this place was also shattered. She didn't believe that Yu Qianzhou could escape from Bai Changchun's hands. From now on, she could only concentrate on cultivation and prepare to enter the netherworld as soon as possible. After Bai Shouji and the other 3 people returned to the Wu family, they parted ways after a discussion. At the same time, Bai Zizong and the other 3 people also learned that Yu Qianzhou's life or death was unknown. They sighed and followed their respective family heads back. Wu Lixue, who heard the news from her brother, didn't know whether she was happy or worried. She just hugged the so-called vermilion bird egg and stayed alone in the quiet guest house for a long time, As for what would happen in the outside world, Yu Qianqiu didn't have time to worry about it. He was very busy. First, he quickly built a bird's nest at the location that Li had chosen. Then, he started his own great undertaking. He had to do it. If he wanted to stay on Shuntian Island, he still had to do some superficial work. Otherwise, he might not be able to stay. If he didn't stay, how would he have the chance to get the spiritual treasure? He had to endure the humiliation. One of the flying swords carried him in the sky while the other 99 swords cut down the thorns and weeds on the ground. The cold light rolled back and forth on the ground, leveling the ground. Li was watching from the side in amazement. It was also his first time seeing someone who could control so many flying swords at the same time. However, he didn't know that Yu Qianqiu was very depressed in the sky. He remembered that when he first came to supporting Immortal Island, he was sent to pick dung and plant spirit herbs. This time, it was the same on Shuntian Island. Could it be that he really had fate with farming? The seeds of the deficient flame profound fruit must be planted when the sun is high in the sky. Each seed must be spaced 1 meter apart. Place a high-grade spirit stone under the seed to cultivate the soil. Only then can it germinate and grow. After it germinates, it must be placed a high-grade spirit stone under it every day until it matures. Li said as he threw down a big bag of high-grade spirit stones. Yu Qianqiu looked at this plot of land that needed to plant 200 seeds. Just this plot of land alone required 200 high-grade spirit stones every day. It would take 2 years for the seeds to mature, which was more than 700 days. Based on this calculation, it would probably cost more than 100,000 high-grade spirit stones. And this was just him. Li's side would need even more. Adding both sides together, it would probably cost more than 1 million high-grade spirit stones. But thinking about it, with Bai Changchun's status in the demon domain, this amount of spirit stones was nothing. A few days later, after the deficient flame profound fruit germinated, Yu Qianqiu felt that it was troublesome. Every day, he had to put spirit stones under the trees. He also had to be careful not to damage the roots. As a result, he had to do it at least 200 times a day. He also had to remove weeds and prevent pests, which made him very depressed. He wanted to sneak away several times, but he was worried about Bai Changchun's incomparably powerful divine sense. He was afraid that if he left, Bai Changchun would find out and he wouldn't have to come back anymore. He planned to wait and see. If he wanted to go out and come back safely, he could only wait for Bai Changchun to find the refining materials. Only then could he steal it. However, he also had to think of a way to deal with this guy, Li. After Yu Qianqiu made up his mind, he calmed down. From time to time, he would use his divine sense to maintain contact with Utopia. From then on, every night when the stars were high in the sky, he would fly to the top of the ancient tree on the roof of the wooden house. He would take out a jade archive and calmly draw the changing paths of the stars in the east, west, north, and center. During his free time during the day, he would carefully study the mysteries within. He believed that there must be mysteries within the 5 stars. It was not as simple as a fire art of the southern stars. You're tuning in to the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.